It begins like any other morning at Birmingham Airport. The steady rhythm of suitcase wheels on polished floors. Families shuffling through check-in queues. Business travelers with laptops slung over one shoulder, rushing for coffee before their flight is called. Announcements echo from the loudspeakers. Final boarding at gate 27, security check in progress at gate 12. On the surface it is routine. Safe. Familiar. But behind that ordinary hum lies something far more sinister. Because hidden among the tourists, the holiday makers, and the commuters are men and women moving millions of pounds worth of Class A drugs, right under the noses of airport staff and fellow passengers. For years, Birmingham Airport has been more than just a gateway to Europe or a stopover to the Caribbean. It has also been a frontline in Britain's war on organized crime. A place where suitcases sometimes carry more than beach towels and souvenirs. Where a single unchecked bag can flood an entire city with cocaine or heroin. Border Force officers and National Crime Agency teams have learned to look past the ordinary, to see patterns in flight bookings, in baggage tags, in nervous glances at passport control. And what they have found is staggering. Every year, seizures at UK airports amount to millions of pounds in drugs. Cocaine from Mexico, heroin from Pakistan, synthetic drugs from Europe. Birmingham is no exception. And in the shadows of this airport, 3 very different smuggling stories would unfold. The first, a family-run operation led not by a hardened gangster, but by a grandmother, Fazana Cowzer, who turned her children and relatives into an international trafficking cell. A network bold enough to move 180 kilos of cocaine across borders, yet fragile enough to collapse in a single November night. The second, a story of arrogance and violence. Majid Hussein, a man who believed he could walk through security with heroin in his hand luggage. His recklessness would open the door to a police raid that uncovered not just drugs, but guns, ammunition, and hundreds of thousands in dirty cash. And the third, quieter, more mechanical, Uza Rashid, a courier in his 20s. A pawn in a wider network stretching all the way to Pakistan. His job was simple: carry, deliver, disappear. But his capture would reveal the precision with which traffickers coordinate from afar, and the risks they're willing to take on young shoulders. 3 stories, 3 operations, 3 warnings. Together, they form a tapestry of crime stitched into the very fabric of Birmingham Airport. And in the chapters ahead, we will unravel how routine flights, ordinary passengers, and everyday suitcases became part of an empire built on drugs, and how, case by case, that empire began to crumble. It is often said that family is the first shield we have against the world, the place we learn loyalty, trust, and belonging. But in the story of the Cowzer family, those values were twisted into something darker. At the center of it all stood Fazana Cowzer, a mother, a grandmother, and ultimately the architect of a smuggling empire that used kinship as currency. Fazana did not fit the image of a criminal mastermind. In her 60s, she had the look of a woman who might fuss over her grandchildren, who might host Sunday dinners and urge everyone to take second helpings. Yet behind closed doors, she was orchestrating one of the most audacious trafficking operations Birmingham Airport had ever seen. Her method was as simple as it was daring. She realized that airports are built on rhythm, the constant synchrony of arrivals and departures. Flights are rarely isolated. They overlap and interlock, with short-haul planes arriving just as long-haul jets are touching down. Fazana exploited that system. The plan worked like this. Suitcases filled with cocaine would arrive in Birmingham on long-haul flights from Cancun, Mexico. Those bags would be tagged, sent through baggage claim, and arrive on the carousel like any other luggage. But no passenger would step forward to claim them. Instead, members of Fazana's network, her own children, their partners, and trusted associates, would book short-haul flights that landed at Birmingham around the same time. They would walk through customs as if they just returned from a European holiday, quietly collecting the unaccompanied suitcases before slipping back into the city. For months, the system ran like clockwork. The Cowzers moved hundreds of kilos of cocaine through Birmingham, using nothing more than flight schedules, baggage tags, and family trust. Each shipment was worth millions on the street, enough to fuel an empire and enough to keep the family tightly bound together by money as much as blood. But crime, like family, has fault lines. And in November 2024, those cracks split wide open. It was just another operation, another Cancun suitcase scheduled to arrive in Birmingham. But this time, Border Force officers were waiting. Acting on intelligence and surveillance, they intercepted the bag before it left the carousel. Inside lay 180 kilograms of high-purity cocaine, its bricks neatly wrapped, its street value a staggering £14.4 million. For the Cowzer family, the takedown was devastating. Officers moved quickly, raiding homes and rounding up the network Fazana had built piece by piece. Children, partners, and associates were arrested side by side. What had once been a family unit was now a chain of evidence, each link connecting back to the grandmother at its head. The betrayal cut deep. Sons who had trusted their mother, daughters-in-law who thought they had married into stability, all dragged into a criminal world by the woman who should have been their protector. For Fazana, family loyalty had been both her greatest strength and her ultimate weakness. It made her network difficult to penetrate, but it also meant that when one bag was caught, the entire family tree came under scrutiny. By December, the case was before the courts. The atmosphere inside Birmingham Crown Court was heavy as the sentences were read out. The matriarch, Fazana Cowzer, received 13 years and 4 months, a stark symbol of how far she had fallen. Her children and close associates received between 7 and 10 years each, their roles acknowledged but overshadowed by the woman who had directed them. One daughter-in-law, perhaps more bystander than participant, was given a suspended sentence. Together, their punishments amounted to decades behind bars, a family empire dismantled in a single judgment. Looking back, the Cowzer case was more than a story of drug smuggling. It was a story about how the bonds of family, when twisted by greed, can become chains that drag everyone down. Fazana had believed that loyalty would protect her, that children would not betray a mother, that a spouse would not question a partner, that blood was thicker than suspicion. But in the end, it was precisely that loyalty which exposed them. When one fell, all fell. When one bag was seized, the entire network collapsed. From the outside, it was just another case file, another seizure, another group of traffickers behind bars. But for those who watched it unfold, the officers who tracked the suitcases, the prosecutors who read out the charges, and even the jurors who listened in silence, it was a chilling reminder. The line between family and conspiracy can be frighteningly thin. And as Fazana Cowzer was led away from the courtroom, one truth lingered. She had built her empire on the people she loved most. And in doing so, she had destroyed them. Airports are built on precision. Every bag weighed, every document checked, every passenger logged. But sometimes, it's the smallest oversight that exposes an entire empire. For investigators at Birmingham Airport, 2 cases, separated by 5 years, showed how even the most carefully planned smuggling operations could collapse in an instant. It was 2016 when customs officers noticed something unusual. A man named Majid Hussein was returning from abroad, his walk casual, his expression unreadable. Nothing about him screamed smuggler. He wasn't sweating or twitching, no hurried steps, no darting eyes. Yet when his luggage was scanned, one item stood out, a single wrap of heroin, tucked carelessly among his belongings. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than a personal use quantity. But officers knew better. Smugglers rarely risk airport checks for such a trivial amount. If Hussein was carrying even a single wrap, it raised a bigger question. What was waiting behind the curtain of his ordinary life? That question took investigators straight to his home. What they found would unravel his secret world. Inside, police uncovered kilos of heroin, meticulously packaged for distribution. Alongside the drugs were firearms, ammunition, and nearly 300,000 pounds in cash, evidence not just of smuggling but of a man living at the center of a violent, lucrative network. Hussein's mistake had been simple: arrogance or carelessness. Perhaps he thought one wrap wouldn't trigger suspicion. Perhaps he had become numb to the risk after years of success. But in the forensic world of airport checks, even the smallest error is magnified. When the case came to court, prosecutors framed it plainly. Hussein wasn't an addict or a courier, he was a dealer, armed and organized, caught out by a moment of complacency. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison, with a confiscation order targeting his dirty fortune. His story became a cautionary tale whispered through Birmingham's underworld. One slip, one wrap can cost everything. Fast forward to 2021, and the pattern repeated itself, though this time with a different face. Mohammed Uza Rashid was not a kingpin. He was a courier, a man working the low rungs of the chain, carrying someone else's product for someone else's profit. Yet his arrest revealed just as much about the machinery of international smuggling as Hussein's downfall had. Rashid landed at Birmingham Airport after a long-haul flight. On the surface he was just another passenger, one suitcase in tow. But hidden inside was 18 kilograms of heroin, high purity, tested between 66% and 71%, a grade meant not for street corners but for cutting, diluting, and multiplying into hundreds of thousands of individual deals. On the street, the haul was worth millions. Rashid was no mastermind. He was following orders, handed down through WhatsApp messages from handlers in Pakistan. The instructions were clear: when to collect, where to drop, how to move without attracting attention. His role was to keep his head down, to walk unnoticed through security like countless others. But again, routine checks made the difference. Luggage scanners and customs profiling flagged Rashid's suitcase, and when officers opened it, the game was up. The heroin, tightly packed and unmistakable, left no room for excuses. Unlike Hussein, Rashid carried no weapons, no stacks of cash. He was just a cog in the wheel. Yet the law treated his actions with equal weight. He was sentenced to 9 years in prison, another life rewritten by a single bag on a single day. Together, the two cases painted a forensic picture of how drug smuggling fails. Hussein's downfall came from recklessness, a dealer who underestimated the scrutiny of airport staff. Rashid's collapse came from discipline gone wrong, a courier who followed every instruction but still couldn't beat technology and routine surveillance. Both stories underscored a truth prosecutors repeated in court: smuggling is not undone by drama but by detail. The rap too small to ignore. The suitcase too heavy to pass. The digital trail too sharp to erase. By the time both men were sentenced, their stories had been absorbed into Birmingham Airport's unspoken history, reminders that no matter the role, from kingpin to mule, the system has cracks. And it only takes one misstep, one search, one routine stop, for the entire operation to unravel. Courtrooms are where shadows finally meet the light. For the smugglers who used Birmingham Airport as their gateway, it was here, in wood-paneled chambers lined with history, that their stories ended. Each case unfolded like the final act of a long play. The Cowzer family, once bound together by blood and loyalty, now sat separated by the dock, listening as their empire was read back to them in cold legal terms. Prosecutors didn't call it family. They called it industrial-scale trafficking. The judge emphasized the betrayal of trust, the conscious choice to use family bonds as a business structure for crime. Fazana Cowzer, once a mother and grandmother at the head of a household, was sentenced to 13 years and 4 months. Her children, her closest confidants, received between 7 and 10 years. A daughter-in-law, swept up in the scheme, was spared prison but given a suspended sentence. It was a stark lesson. The strength of family unity had been their shield, but also their undoing. Then came the story of Majid Hussein, a man undone not by sophisticated police intelligence, but by his own carelessness. A single heroin wrap, discovered in his hand luggage during a random check, unraveled a life built on illusion. Behind the gloss of everyday travel was an arsenal: kilos of heroin, firearms, ammunition, and 300,000 pounds in cash. In the courtroom, prosecutors described it as arrogance, thinking he could walk through security unchallenged. The judge saw it differently: reckless endangerment. Hussein was handed 12 years, and a confiscation order stripped him of his ill-gotten wealth. For him, the courtroom was not just judgment, it was exposure. Finally, there was Uza Rashid, a very different figure. He wasn't a leader, not the architect of an empire. He was a courier, a man with a suitcase, following instructions whispered through WhatsApp by a handler thousands of miles away in Pakistan. In his luggage, security found 18 kilograms of heroin, purity levels between 66 and 71%. The court heard how each brick of heroin represented profit for organized crime and devastation for communities. Rashid received 9 years, a sentence that reflected both his role and his willingness to risk his freedom for someone else's fortune. Across all 3 cases, one theme echoed: what the smugglers thought of as routine, passing through airports, blending with holiday makers, treating security like background noise, was anything but invisible. Intelligence-led policing had been patient, methodical, and relentless. Surveillance, scanning technology, and international cooperation pulled apart every layer of secrecy. In the end, what looked like ordinary suitcases became symbols of collapse. Prosecutors summed it up in words that carried weight: this was industrial-scale trafficking. Drugs that destroy lives, fuel violence, and corrode communities. Those who profit from it will face the consequences. And so, between Isleworth Crown Court, Birmingham Crown Court, and beyond, the final sentences were delivered. Years stacked on years, over a century of prison time handed down collectively. Leaders were struck hardest, lieutenants felt the weight proportionally, and lesser players were given suspended sentences or warned of what might come. The irony is hard to miss. The very strategies that made these networks strong, the tight family bonds of the Cowzers, the overconfidence of Hussein, the discipline of Rashid's courier model, also contained the seeds of downfall. A family's loyalty left them all vulnerable. A single careless mistake opened a door to everything hidden. A courier's blind obedience placed him under the microscope of law enforcement. Birmingham Airport remained the constant backdrop, a place of reunions and departures, business trips and holidays, but also a stage for crimes that thought themselves invisible. In the end, three very different stories converged in one truth: no smuggling operation, no matter how clever, survives the patience of the law. Because every suitcase carried more than drugs. It carried the weight of risk, betrayal, and eventually, collapse. And that is the story of Birmingham Airport's hidden empire. 3 networks, 3 downfalls, 1 lesson. The traffickers thought they could pass unnoticed, blending into the crowds. But their empires ended where millions of ordinary journeys begin, in the shadow of airport security. If you found this story gripping, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next case we uncover. These stories remind us that behind the most ordinary places, an airport queue, a baggage carousel, lies a battle between crime and consequence. And here, as always, the consequence is one.